Hi, everyone. So today we are going to be talking about traveling while you are getting your green card application, or if you are undocumented, because this makes such a difference depending on if you have a travel authorization or not. That's really going to decide what you will go through when you're trying to come back to the US. So let's talk about traveling, whether you're traveling outside of the US or within the US, to make sure that you are safe and protected every single step of the way. If you are new here, I am attorney Lillian Chukura. I'm a US-based immigration lawyer, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the US immigration law system. So, if you have been on TikTok, Instagram, on the internets of the world, you would have seen what happened to the people trying to come back to the US from Puerto Rico, where they had to do a stop in the Bahamas. And that's what really prompted this video, because I always tell my clients to be careful with domestic flights, right? Especially if you are going to Puerto Rico, Alaska, or Hawaii, right? If you are not in the continental United States, you really need to be careful, because you can end up in another country that is not the United States when your whole travel plan is to stay in the United States. So if you do not know, if you are in the US and you want to travel to another US state, all you need is proof of ID. So typically a state ID, a driver's license is all you need to board the flight, okay? But if you are taking an international flight, you need a passport. And if you are not a US citizen, you not only need your passport from your country of origin, you also need either a green card or some form of travel permit or a visa that allows you to come in and out of the US. So you need one of those three things to be able to travel. So let's go ahead and watch what happened to people traveling to Puerto Rico, okay, from Miami to Puerto Rico, still within the US. And what happened to them? Because again, this is something, it does not happen often. Okay, it does not happen often, but it does happen. So let's go ahead and watch this.
Cool. Hi. So we're on an American Airlines flight number, what was it?
2421.
2421. We left from Puerto Rico at what, 5:30 p.m.? We were on that flight for max 2 hours. We flew around in a circle for about 30 minutes because of weather. Then the pilot decided, hey, we need to land in the Bahamas. Puerto Rico to the U.S. is a domestic flight. This is a different country. We land here. The pilot or somebody at the front of the plane asks us, who here has their passport, who doesn't? Lo and behold, everybody does, or everybody does not, because everybody expected to go from the U.S. to the U.S. We land in the plane. We're on the plane, sitting on the tarmac for like what, 2 hours, something like that. We got off the plane. Turns out the pilot can't do overtime or something, so they had to get off the plane. We get off here. Of course, everybody probably already assumed we can't leave the terminal because we're not allowed to be here. Like most people, we're illegally here. We can't leave. Not only can we not leave the airport, we can't leave the terminal. We can't do anything. We got here. That was when when did we land here? At 8:30.
And like I always tell people, like, I feel so bad for these people because their whole intention was to go to a US state. They had no intentions of going to the Bahamas, because if they were planning to go to the Bahamas, they would have packed their passport, because they would have known, hey, you need your US passport, you need some form of visa to get to Bahamas. But that was not their intention. So when you are traveling within the United States, you do not need a passport, you do not need a travel permit, you do not need a visa, right? Because you are within the US. But once you leave the United States and go to the Bahamas, even if it was not your choice, right? They bought tickets to go from the US to the US, like he said. It was not their choice. to end up in another country. But guess what? If someone on that flight, if someone on that flight did not have a travel permit or did not have US citizenship or a visa or permanent residency, you are going to end up in immigration proceedings, being deported, basically not being allowed to come back into the US, or being paroled into the US, basically being permitted to come back to the US. So you are really in a position where if you have not taken certain steps to make sure you are able to travel in and out of the US, and you are now ending up in this situation where your flight that you were confident was going to end up in the US ends up in a completely different country. Now you have to go through protection, you have to go through immigration to come back into the US. So if you are traveling from, let's say, New York to Chicago, right? You are just going to go from terminal to terminal and out of the airport. You don't have to go through immigration because it's not an international flight. But when your flight that's supposed to go from Puerto Rico to Miami stops in Bahamas, and now it has to go from Bahamas to Miami, now it's an international flight, and now you have to go through immigration. So, luckily for this person, it sounds like they are a US citizen, so they don't have to worry about the things that could go wrong, right? Because things can go wrong. So, when this happens, when you get to the airport, they're going to be trying to figure out who's a US citizen, who's a permanent resident, what are the status that people have, and can they legally be allowed to come back into the US, right? It's about whether you can legally be allowed to come back into the US. And if you do not have any status and you are on this flight, unfortunately, you are now at the mercy of the officers at the airport of whether they're going to let you back into the US or put you in immigration court proceedings or detain you and deport you. Okay, they can deny you entry into the US, and all you did was go on vacation to Puerto Rico. So I always like to, when my clients, I'll say this, I've had clients ask me where we have their green card application pending, and they ask me, can I travel to Puerto Rico? And my answer is technically yes, but I do not recommend it. Right? Technically, yes, as with your status, right? Even though you don't have status, you have a valid ID, so you can get on a flight to Puerto Rico. It's still part of the US, but there is that, 1 in 10 chance that your flight ends up being diverted to another airport that's outside of the US. And if that happens, now you're going to have an issue because you don't already have a travel permit. You don't already have your green card approved. So that's where you're going to end up having issues. Okay. So now let's talk about what you can do as your green card application is pending to make sure that if you ever end up in this situation that you are protected. So what you can do is make sure that you apply for a travel permit. So whenever you're applying for your green card, you have the right to also apply for a travel permit. Once your travel permit is approved, you are now legally allowed to travel back into the US if you end up in a situation like this. Okay. So that's what I tell my clients all the time is before you travel, let me know where you're going. So I make sure it's a place that you can actually travel to based on your status. And let's go ahead and file a travel permit if it's an emergency. Let's say you have to leave the US. You have to leave the US and it's an emergency. Let's apply for an emergency travel document so that you can travel and be able to come back in. Okay, with a green card application, if you travel outside of the US and you do not have advanced parole, right? You don't have a travel permission to travel, right? You don't have that travel permit. Guess what happens? you are not allowed to come back in. And your green card application that's pending is now considered abandoned. Okay, so it's going to be harder for you to come back into the US. So communicate, communicate, communicate with your lawyer as you're going through the process, because sometimes you think you can do certain things and technically you can, but we still don't recommend it because you could end up on that flight that is the 1 in 10 chance of you being outside of the US without a travel permit. Okay, and thankfully, Thankfully, I have not had this happen to any of my clients because they actually choose to take my legal advice and not take that flight to Puerto Rico, but go to Florida, go to enjoy your time within continental United States, because like I said, if you're going from, let's say, New York to Chicago, if your flight needs to be diverted, it's going to go to another airport within the US, right? Another city, another state, but it's going to be within the US. Now if you're going to Puerto Rico and you're trying to come back, you may end up in the Bahamas, completely different country that you do not have any rights to be in. And now, because you don't have that travel permit, you also don't have any right to be allowed back into the US unless you are paroled in by the officer at the airport. So it is one of those things that I tell people all the time. It is not a bad idea to travel while your green card application is pending if you have a travel permit approved. If you do not have a travel permit approved, please do not travel. Okay? If you do not have a travel permit approved while your green card application is pending, do not travel, because you may not be able to come back to the US, or even if you're able to, it's going to take a very long time for us to get you back here. So please, if you take nothing else out of this video, if you have a green card application pending and you know that you may want to travel outside of the US, apply for a travel permit, right? Yes, there's an additional fee for the travel permit, but please apply for the travel permit so that you at least have an application pending. If there's an emergency that comes up, a parent is sick, someone dies, and you have to be there, we can do an emergency travel application to get you approved and out of the US within the time that you need. But if you don't already have an application pending, we're basically doing everything on that at that point. So please, please, please do not travel unless you have a travel permit. All right. So I am seeing some questions on Instagram. Gamfi, if you're still on, I'm not sure if your question just wasn't finished. It says, can you apply for a green card? I think there's more to that question, so feel free to ask the full question. Okay, so next question. What happens after 120 days of a successful marriage green card interview, but no news from the USCIS? The online portal says nothing is pending. Interview is checked off. Okay, so basically, if it's been that long, you can try to do a service request, send a letter to the USCIS office. When you leave an interview, right, you as the person being asked the questions or anything like that may think that the interview went well and it was successful. However, the officer may have a completely different view of the interview. So keep that in mind as well. And sometimes, just take an objective look, because if you were not interviewed together, you may want to go over the questions that were asked and make sure that your answers were the same. If you were interviewed together, was there anything in the interview that could have raised a red flag for the officer that will require additional questioning, or research on their end before they can approve your case. So, but if it's been over 120 days, what is available to you is a service request. If I'm not saying this is what's happened on your case, I'm just giving information for people that may be hearing this question and have additional follow-ups. If your case was referred to the fraud investigation unit, when you do a service request, all you're going to get back is we are still making a decision, right? We have not made a decision. There's nothing we need from you right now. We're just not able to finalize the case. Okay. That is the standard answer that USCIS is going to give. And if they are doing a fraud investigation, there's not really a timeline of how long they have to do that. So they have some backlogs. And if part of their investigation is that they have to do a home visit, okay, again, not saying this is specific to your case. I'm just saying if they have to do a home visit, they have a backlog and it can take over a year for them to get to the home visits, right? So they typically have a few officers doing the interviews and then like a smaller number of officers doing these investigations. So they go by when they receive them and they try to get through them. So if they don't get to them for like a year because they have to do home visits, just know, just know, it is not you, it's just the process, okay? But what you can do, one, do a service request, two, send a letter to the USCIS office where you had your interview, and then three, you can contact your state, your representative for your state, so your congressman or your senator for your state, and ask them for help. If you live in a state where your rep is immigration friendly, right? Immigrants friendly, they would be more willing to at least follow up with USCIS and see whether there's an issue, right? So those are the three things that you can do. Because it's only been 120 days. Now, when you're getting into like 2-3 years of waiting, you may be able to do a mandamus, which is filing a lawsuit against the US government, against USCIS, Department of Homeland Security, to get your application moving. But those are the, I guess, 4 things that you can do. Okay, so Isaac, I'm sorry. So he's saying that the officer said that nothing was pending, that she just needed to update her system. I'm sorry, but officers lie sometimes. So just keep that in mind as well. But if that is actually what's going on, they may have gotten distracted and started working on other cases and never had the time to do that. So the things that the 3 things that I said to do would typically help push those through. If it's just that they haven't gotten to update their system, or they just got distracted with the other cases they had that day and just haven't had time to go in and do that, or they, again, they get stacks and stacks of interviews a day. So sometimes just doing that that request will make them move things along. Okay. We've had cases where the interview was done. It was a successful interview. It should have been approved the same day, but they just never got to it. And we gave them their 120 days and it still was no decision. So we had to follow up, not just with we're doing a service request, but also sending a letter directly to the USCIS office that handled the case, that handled the interview, to let them know, hey, we're still waiting. And within 30 days of that, both of my people were either approved or scheduled for an oath ceremony, which is basically an approval for citizenship. So it's really about following up, okay? When things don't move, you have to keep following up so that your case doesn't fall somewhere in the dark. Okay. So if you have questions, put them in the comments. I don't see any other questions um, on here. All right. So just to um, go back to what we were talking about to start with, if you are not a green card holder, a US citizen, or someone on a visa that allows you to travel back and forth to the US, you need to worry about traveling to something to a state that's not within the continental United States. So I mean Puerto Rico, Alaska, and Hawaii. Worry about those because if the flight gets diverted to another country, you are now outside of the US and you need to ask for permission to come into the US. But if you're going from one state to the other, right? You're going from New York to New Jersey. You're not asking for permission to go into New Jersey. You're not asking permission to enter the US. Okay, so it's really important that as your green card application is pending, that you keep in mind that this can happen to you if you travel to Puerto Rico, right? I always tell my clients, this is a possibility, and I am concerned about your plans to travel. Right? This is a strong concern. And now I have an actual example that I can be like, hey, look at these people and what happened to them. And I am hoping that the people on that flight had status in the US and were able to travel outside of the US and into the US without an issue. But if there's someone on that flight that does not have status, or that has a green card application pending, but they did not file for a travel permit or wait for that travel permit to be approved, they're going to be in a harsh situation where they basically have to ask for permission to come back into the US, and it's up to the officer to make that decision. And part of that decision may be, yes, you can come back into the US, but we're going to put you in deportation proceedings. Or, no, you cannot come back to the US. You now have to finish your green card process outside of the US, and you most likely will need a waiver and everything else that goes along with that. So, to avoid that issue, only travel outside of the US if you have an approved travel permit while your green card application is pending. Once you have your green card approved and your card in your hand, you are good to travel, okay? But while the green card application is pending, you need to make sure that you have a travel permit, all right? So I do not see any other questions. Thank you all so much for joining me. If you got value out of this video, don't forget to hit the like button. If you would like help with your green card process, your citizenship process, to get you to that next level, feel free to schedule a strategy session with me. It is a free 15-minute strategy session where we talk about your particular situation and figure out the best options for you. And you can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, and clicking on contact us. And once you do that, you will be able to schedule a date and time that works best for you for us to speak. You can also call my office at 508-443-1788. Once again, I am attorney Lillian Chukura, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships. Bye.